And when I looked at different LMSs, I saw that across the board, most LMSs are focusing on providing information to people and not necessarily making sure that people are engaged with the content and really build skills. And engagement with content, in a way, it's a key for transforming information into a skill development and really to help us to get real outcomes. And I think why this meetup and webinar is so fascinating because today we have three different experts that have so many years of experience in helping people learn better and create better engagement. And I think we have an outstanding panel, and I would love to introduce you this panel. And the panel today will be around engagement and how to create engagement. So we have with us, we have Valerie, Susan, and Mark. Good to see you. And maybe each one of you can say a few words just to introduce yourself to the group. So maybe Valerie, let's do by the order I see on my screen. So maybe Valerie, you wanna start?
Sure, thank you so much. So yes, I'm Valerie Lenick, and I'm here. I'm apparently the gamification expert. No, I joke. I have been in the field for as long as the field has been around, and so I work across higher education, workforce, pretty much everybody who helps learners in some way. I've worked with, and so that is my focus. I focus on a lot of creativity studies and helping people to create better outcomes. So it's not just I focus on the engagement piece, but the engagement piece to get you to better outcome um, answer. And so that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Valerie. Susan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to share, the value, I think, and insights that I bring, which is a very unique perspective. I actually come from the world of learning and development and, ran training for large corporations, ran my own instructional design business, and created what I would call a transformative learning strategy. But then I flipped and I got into the front side of the business and really started focusing on client loyalty and building brands. And what I love about it is it's a direct result of what I learned from how to engage people in learning and learning platforms. So I love that I've taken learning, what's traditionally thought of as learning, and turned it into actual, business driver and been able to make those connections because now I have both sides of that brain working. So I'm thrilled to bring that perspective today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Susan. And we also have Mark. Mark, good to see you. You want to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm Mark Baglow. I've had a career in learning and development and education. So I've worked in various sectors, including tech and financial services. And now I work as a freelance trainer and coach, particularly in areas such as management and leadership. So I've also run training for corporations. So yeah, I think got some good insights into this topic today.
Good, good. So good to have you all. And let's start. I want to start with a simple question, but it's not always, some people might have different answers for this question. So maybe, Mark, you can start with this one. How would you define engagement in learning? Like, in your perspective, what is an engagement?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? Because it seems very simple, but actually doing it is always the tricky bit. So I find that engagement, particularly when you're talking about in a business context, is it's sometimes a difficult thing, and I think it can depend on the type of learning that you're doing. I think, when we're doing learning in businesses, sometimes we've got the mandatory, the compliance learning, that might be regulatory things, might be health and safety, which, we all kind of have to do at some point. So sometimes getting engagement on that kind of learning, that can be a bit of a challenge. But then you've got the optional learning as well. So giving people the ability to learn new skills, to get new opportunities, take on new challenges. And that's really, I think, where the engagement side comes into it. So if you've got people who are engaged in learning, they're not just doing the bare minimum. looking for new opportunities. So what other content, what other training and opportunities have you got? So if you've got an LMS, for example, are they just doing the bare minimum, or are they seeking out other content? So I think when you've got engagement, you're seeing people looking for those extra opportunities and looking for that extra content. And you've also got a social side to it as well. You've got people asking questions or responding to it, coming up in discussions with managers or with peers. And you kind of get that bit of a buzz around it as well. So yeah, that's the sort of very briefly my picture of what engagement looks like.
No, that's interesting. In my perspective, I think, if you really want to simplify it, like there are many different ways to measure engagement, but eventually you want people to be emotionally invested in the training.
Mm.
And I think, so often people are taking training and they just take it because they have to do it, but they're very emotionally disconnected from the training itself. And I think, in a way, creating high engagement with the learners, it means that they really care about it and, they really want to do it. Valerie, Susan, do you want to add anything to this point?
I would love to, because I completely agree. People come to me and they say we need more learner engagement. It reminds me of the movie The Princess Bride, when he says, I don't think that word means what you think it means. And in my sense, I don't mean it like you're wrong. I just mean we're using the words and we think we're having the same conversation, but we're not actually having the same conversation quite often. And so I often try to get people to dig down to it. And I think Mark kind of touched on some of mine. I kind of help them break it into pieces. I was like, well, what kind of engagement are we looking for? What do we need in this particular situation, in this context? So I was telling them, are you looking for cognitive engagement? Is this a knowledge thing? Do they need, to learn some new knowledge about something? Is it more behavioral? Do we need to focus on them doing something differently? What is that type? That engagement would be a little bit different. I would choose different elements. I would choose different options for that. To Mark's point, is it social? Quite often that's the piece that we desperately miss. And especially with online learning, we miss that piece. We put them in a little e-learning module and we tell them, here, this is everything you need to know. But obviously it can't be, because there's a big world out there that they're supposed to use that information in. And then to Idan's point, it has to be emotional. That's the golden standard. If you can get people to that emotional engagement place, that's where they do come back. So I think of it engagement, almost if you think of people getting engaged, a couple getting engaged, you're forming a partnership. When you have learner engagement, the learner now has formed a partnership with you to advance their skills, your company, or whatever the situation is. So I think drilling down on it a little bit. Sometimes we just use these words a little too freely and just assume that we're all, saying the same thing.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you mentioned, bringing people together. And, I think this is one of the key principles in myQuest, because when we started actually the platform, we didn't want to build LMS at the beginning. We really wanted to build a platform that helps people to go through a process and achieve a goal in their lives. And it's easier to do it together, right? So it's very essential piece for any process in life, as well as with learning and training, right? Now, Susan, the next question is for you. I know that in your business, and this is one of the things I really liked about what you're doing, you're really focusing on outcomes for the organization, right? It's all about impact. It's all about, how the learning really impacts the bottom line of the organization. And I would be very curious to learn from your experience. Do you see any correlation between engagement in training to eventually the outcome that the organization can achieve? And does it also go vice versa? For example, when engagement is low, maybe it still works, I don't know. So love to get your perspective on it.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think there's two things you want to think about from an outcome perspective, right? Am I ultimately looking to impact turnover? Am I ultimately looking to impact feelings of competency, right? Or skill or empowerment? Or am I ultimately looking at client satisfaction and client engagement? And honestly, if it can't point back to one of those, we shouldn't even be doing it. And so I like to think about training in and of itself as an end product that solves a goal. So we kind of think about training more as a product, and take a product development approach to it, right? And then engagement becomes, how do we attract people to want to take this training, which I think everyone else was talking about. And I want to be really clear, because I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective. I don't care if you want to take it, but I can always figure out a way to make it exciting for you to take it. So nobody ever is going to ever say, I want to take compliance training. Ever. Never, right? Like, that's not really the goal. The goal of compliance training is really to satisfy a request in the business, usually government function or business function or whatever it is. And so how do you make that exciting? It's a contest. People love a contest. So I think we get a little concerned over, I guess I would want to say, there's so many different ways to get at engagement that it doesn't always have to be that the training is meaningful to me, because a lot of compliance training is, and I'm making fun of compliance training. I don't mean to do that. Because I would challenge you to go to the TSA's Instagram page. They do all their compliance training that way, and it's spectacularly funny. So if you can make training funny, people love that a lot more. But ultimately, like there's an engagement. So I think the thing to think about is training in and of itself is a product that only solves the problem about 10% of the time. And the rest of it becomes, how do we interact with our potential client? And who's our client right now? We have internal clients, we have external clients. The business unit is my client, the CEO is my client, and each one of them have a different perspective that I need to make sure I can satisfy, because that's how you get engagement. So a little bit of a different way to look at it, from a trainer, I was always, like, my guiding light was always that they learned something. I had to kind of suspend that a little bit for myself and open myself up to, how did it enhance something in their life versus whether or not it was really like a learning component. So there's just a few different points of view around around engagement, and not necessarily being because I want to, but because there's a reason for me to. And whether that reason is because it's fun, or because I'm going to get something for it, or because I think it's actually meaningful in my job, or because somebody else told me it was really good and I should take it and I value their opinion. Like, there's lots of ways to make engagement true.
You had a very interesting point, Susan. Well, I didn't think about it before, but it's really true. If you're looking at the different ways to create engagement in the training, you really want to think on what this training is all about. Because for some training, like compliance training, you might want to use more of, external motivation elements such as leaderboard or competition, to really like, okay, the content is not very exciting. Let's bring something exciting around the content, right? To make people participate.
Exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other way around, for example, leadership training or sales training, salespeople really want to sell more, right? Like they come with the motivation. So over there, obviously competition, it's always great, right? Like not always, but it can be great in this scenario. But in this scenario, sometimes you can use other elements of engagement, such as feedback and community and working together, and maybe building a story for people so people can envision where they can be at the end of the program. So I think one good point that I got from you is, when you try to think on the different elements that you want to use to create high engagement in your program, try also to think what type of program do you have, and try to align these elements with what you're actually teaching and training, because there is no one size fits all, right? It really depends on what you're teaching and training, on what elements you want to use. And this brings me to my next question. Maybe we'll start with you, Valerie. This is actually a question I want to ask all of you. I think Susan already gave us the answer for this. Like, what is the best element? Obviously it changed from training to training, but is there any specific element that you really like in terms of creating engagement? Like this is like the golden thing that you always want to bring, or almost most of the time you want to bring to training that you create and deliver? Valerie, you want
Oh,
to start?
oh wow. Yeah. Give me the hard ones. Now it I so agree with Susan because it is so important that like if you don't understand the why, because so often it is all this other stuff is not necessarily there's all these side things like, that you can be building team cohesion while they're learning some topic if you structure the training in a certain way. So yeah, that whole piece. But as far as getting people going, I'm a big fan of of the elements of self-determination theory because if you start there and understand that if you give people some autonomy and you show them both that they have the ability to make progress and what that progress is, and and it's relatable. They're relating to other people and they're relating to the content. Like that one little, it seems like such a simple little theory, but like that one little piece gives you like uncracks so much of it. And so the first part of it is the autonomy. And so giving people choice, quite often, it's just a matter of, as you said, it's not one size fits all. And anytime I can give people an option between doing this or this to get them to where they're going, because that's the point. It's not to make sure they did this particular activity or took this particular quiz. It's to make sure that they got to where they were going. And so again, because we're to Susan's point, like we treat training like it's this little separate world. I used to hate when people would say, "Oh, we're going to send you to training." I was like, it sounded like they were sending me to my room, like they were punishing me or something. I was like, no, the training is part of the workflow. It's part of getting you to progress toward whatever it is you're trying to progress and the company's trying to do, and all these things. So I think back in the old days in the 1990s, I think they were really popular. Like the choose your own adventure books were really popular, like giving people that option to feel like they have some control over the situation, that they're not even in compliance training, back to the, we can all pick on compliance training. Like even in those kind of settings, if you give people a little bit of freedom and you show them how it fits and how it's going to really, it could help them. I think that's just super powerful. So
This is
I kind
good.
of cheated because I was kind of 3 in 1, but
No, I took the autonomy. Like if I take one is the autonomy, and
yeah.
I think it's so important. And think about even when you raise your children, when you let the child choose, what they really want to do, and or you just tell them, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this, you get a very different engagement, as well in our professional life, right? If our boss tells us, you need to do this, versus we come up with an idea, or maybe we're entrepreneurs and we have a vision and idea and we want to fulfill it. It's very different than our self-engagement with what we want to achieve. Is very different. So this is a really great one. And Mark, you want to add your take on it?
Yeah, I think those are all fantastic points. I think the thing about giving learners choice is, in my experience, absolutely essential. If you're just bashing them over the head with compliance training compared to giving them some agency, giving them some choice, is you're always going to see a massive difference. And just to kind of add to all the really really good points, I think again one of the challenges with particularly online training and engagement is that it can feel that you're just on your own. You're just sitting in front of your computer or on your phone doing this e-learning module, and you're just kind of in your own little bubble. And I think one of the key things that I would always try and do is try and incorporate some kind of social element or some kind of offline learning, even if it's just then having line managers bringing it up in their next one-to-one, discussing what they've learned. If you can bring in some kind of social interaction to the learning, I find that can have a huge impact on engagement as well. So just to add to that, all the really good points so far. I think, give them some choice, try and make it a little bit social as well if you can. That really works in my experience.
Yeah, I give you +1 on this. I can tell you that from our experience with myQuest, so we've seen data over 10 years, right? And we have many different social components into the LMS. One of them is one-on-one coaching. Another one is a community. Another one is buddy system. And recently we just add AI-based coaching. So basically, let's say that right now you're doing training for 1,000 people. You don't really have the capacity to provide them one-on-one coaching. Now with AI, you can provide feedback, automatic feedback to learn. And I can tell you that obviously it's each one of those methods, whether it's body system or a coach or a community, has advantages or disadvantages, but it really impacts the training. Like you can really see the difference in the results between people who just taking, just watching videos and click next versus people that are engaged with colleagues and with peers. And you can see the difference not just in the completion rate, but also eventually with knowledge retention and actually the ability of people to build skills. So I agree with you. This is really important, and we put lots of emphasis on it. Susan, you mentioned before competition, right? I know that you're really into like games and into really like make training fun. So love to hear your thoughts on, what's your secret sauce
Yeah.
for engagement.
So I'm in total agreement, and I'll add this third perspective. I've jokingly learned to call it the gut check. And we do a lot of mind body practices and a lot of, I spend a lot of time, an obsessively amount of time, like really studying how our unconscious physiological response to stress is ultimately the root of all action or inaction, right? So if you take those principles, then what we have to do, I call it biohacking, and we have to trick the body all the time and trick it into expansion. That's growth, right? Into expansion. And so I love to do very little simple things that help people assess their level of confidence or competence. You can use the words interchangeably. And often a 1 to 10 system is all you need. You can make it super, super simple. So a lot of times, you might think of it from an assessment standpoint as a pulse check. So midway through something, I'll literally just say, okay, stop right now, 1 to 10. How confident do you feel to take this next step? Especially if it's just something that they've been learning about. And literally on a scale of 1 to 10, you can predict with fairly solid accuracy the willingness of someone to take an actual movement after a course. The other way we flip that is, and I like to do impact scores. So engagement scores are actually good for the training team because they tell us how solid our curriculum is and how well we landed our messaging, right? So that's sort of an internal metric. For the business, it's the impact. So how well do I feel, or am I more prepared in my role? Do I feel more confident to take this action? Am I able to do something that I hadn't done before? Those are really more governed by your gut response to the stress of it. So you can quantify very easily on a 1 to 10 scale that way. And I grab these because I love the mind-body connection of writing. So if I'm doing trainings like this, I will have paddles like this, and we'll do quick 1 to 10, write it on a paddle, because we're tricking the brain and we're adding in this other element. You can have people just grab a piece of paper, write it down, hold it up. Those little actions completely shift perspective. A lot of times bring a lot of comedic relief and really add a lot of engagement to it. So I love contests, but to me, it's more about, can you one up yourself, right? I don't think people always like to be compared to others, but they're always, or I should say, there's value in being able to, can I do something even 10% better than I could before? And do I feel really good about that? And so I kind of play with that and bring that into the mix.
Amazing. Thank you, Susan. By the way, if any one of you have questions while you hear us speaking, feel free to write those in the chat. We can address those, like as we speak or at the end, but feel free to also to add some questions. My next question is, engagement killers or obstacles, like from your perspective and from your experience, what risk we want to avoid, things that can really, ruin the training and ruin engagement. Did you recognize some of those elements in your career? Valerie, I see that you're nodding, so maybe you wanna say something about this?
Yeah, I'm sort of smiling because I had had an experience a couple of years ago. I met someone at a networking event, and when we were talking about, what do you do? What do you do? And as soon as I said the word gamification, I could kind of see this like, she had this like look on her face. And I was like, but she kept talking to me, which was very nice. And but as we were talking, she's like, oh, no. What you're talking about doesn't sound like what I've experienced. She's like, usually when I go to these things that they tell me are engaging, she's like, it's like they're teaching me to scuba dive and then they hand me some cotton candy. And that like that that trying to be fun, that trying to be, impose, like put some fun on top of something that takes the learners out of whatever experience they were having can be so detrimental to them because they're just like, why am I doing this? Like, this doesn't make sense. And it kind of also like ruins the credibility. Like you could be in this like really like, nice flow of what you're doing with them. And then if you try to like just dump something on top that doesn't integrate well with what you're trying to teach them, like then they're just like, okay, that was dumb. Like they don't, that's definitely it's kind of a deal breaker for a lot of people, I think. So that one kind of came to mind when you were asking the question.
It's an interesting point. Sometimes, people implement concepts was in the wrong way, and it's better just not to implement those concepts. Susan and Mark, do you have anything you want to add as far as engagement killers or anything you want to be aware of?
I'll throw one in because I'm guilty of it. And we were just talking about it earlier, is I'm an oversharer. So like I will be that person that monopolizes the conversation and really not from a place of wanting to monopolize the time, but truly from a place of believing I'm sharing in a good way. And so I really have to get good at self-monitoring and really sometimes I'm at the mercy of a really good moderator or facilitator or meeting leader to help me stay on track or keep things in perspective. So that is my when I'm oversharing or having to listen to somebody who's oversharing, I think are the two biggest engagement kind of killers out there.
Interesting. Great. My next question, Mark, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add, just in terms of particularly online learning. So one of the things that I see is being realistic about what learners want and what they can do. It's very easy for us in the world of L&D to think that our training and our content that we're putting out is the most important thing in the world, and it's the most important thing to everybody else in the company. But really, it's probably just part of all the many things that they're dealing with. And sometimes I think we can be guilty of being a little bit over ambitious in terms of what we're expecting people to do and in a certain amount of time. So I think sometimes being realistic about that, and because if we put out too much content and then people don't engage with it, we think we've done something terribly wrong. It's just that, well, it might just be that everybody's really busy at the moment, and we've got to sometimes put ourselves in perspective, I think, because otherwise we get caught up in our own little L&D bubble and think that I'm going to put this course out and everybody's going to do it within the first day. And then they don't, and then you're terribly disappointed. So, yeah, I think also from our perspective, just to add a slightly different twist on it, is sometimes it's being realistic about what you should be achieving within a certain amount of time, and and don't think that you've got terrible engagement just because it hasn't been what you personally would have done in that time.
No, actually, it's a great setup for my next question, which was when you go from in-person training to online training, or maybe even blended training. So what are the best practices from your perspective to create high engagement when using technology? When you create a blended learning experience or you create fully self-paced online learning experience? So Mark, maybe you want to add a few words on this, and then we can hear Susan and Valerie as well.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of online training, I've done quite a lot of blended learning and created quite a lot of e-learning throughout my career. And I think there's a few sort of best practices that you can follow when you're creating that kind of content. I think what I found is things such as keeping it short. People don't want to sit down and do hours and hours of learning, particularly all in one go. So break it up, make it short and easy to digest. Is often one of the really best ways of doing that. Depending on the system that you've got, Some systems can help you to create certain learning paths, even to personalize those to the people, and the system can adapt to what that person enjoys learning and the subjects that they tend to gravitate to. So using things like that can really help to get people to start to have that choice of learning and starting to really engage with what they've got out there. So yeah, I think those are some of the key things. So just make it short as possible. Make it really easy for people to access. They don't want to be going through lots of different systems and having to do loads and loads of different things. When it comes to making it interactive, yes, make it interactive, but don't go over the top. Don't make it so they've got to click on 50 things just to go to the next section of the e-learning, because that gets a bit tiresome as well. So sometimes I find that less can be more when you're building this kind of learning. And again, kind of going back to what I was saying just now, everybody is very busy. So always just bear that in mind. Keep it short and sweet. Keep it relevant to them. And yeah, you should be able to start putting engagement. If you're putting out massively long piece of e-learning with too many interactive elements, then people are just going to switch off and start clicking next as they go through it.
Yeah, this is great stuff. I always love the phrase that every word should pay its rent. I got it from like someone who do billboard advertising on the Times Square back in the 90s and the 80s. He was like really good marketing guy, and the same principle apply to training. Like every piece of content, every word that you're adding in the training, it should pay its rent. Like if it's like redundant, it shouldn't be there. Like you do want to tell a story, you do want to make sure you convey all the information, but don't overwhelm people with too much information. And Susan, Valerie, anything you want to add as far as, when we use online learning versus in-person learning, what would you focus on as well as blended learning?
I'll jump in quick. I'm in total agreement with Mark. Honestly, one of the biggest things that we solve for our clients is just this barrier access. So you'd be surprised, like people can't find it, they can't get back to it, they don't know where it is. Like, just getting people to the course should be, is an area that takes, extreme expertise and quite a few different perspectives. So simplify, and put it in their flow of work. So, it's often the reason I don't like traditional LMS systems. They sit off someplace else. We're much better just where they're already going, like what's in their flow of work, stay in their flow of work. And then the other thing I'm just going to add in there is this is kind of with Mark too, but so think about teaser content. Right. So this is why, like, if you think about Netflix, like we follow a lot of practices used in making documentaries and Netflix and what makes content binge worthy. We spend a lot of time researching that. And it really is like these teaser type things. So I find that probably somewhere we have a little strategy that we take in any video like this. Skip the beginning, go all the way to the end. The best nugget is there, and send that out. And pretty much you can cut out the first 50%. So Mark, to your point, whatever you've created, dump the first 50%. The second half is always better. And then take the very last nugget and put that out as a front and think about it in the terms of like a trailer. So what is it that the end user is seeing for the first time that makes them like curious, interested, hungry, right? Like, how do we pique their interest to get them to want to look inside? So play around with that, like follow best practices from, filmmakers, that's their whole job. And we can learn a lot from that.
Susan, this is a point that I never thought about, but it's true. And I think it can create a huge impact, because if you're looking at stats, you'll see that anywhere between, it depends on the training and on the occasion, but sometimes between like 20 to 50% of the learners just don't sign up to the training. They just have the link in their email somewhere and they just ignore it. And many times when we build training, we were focusing so much on how to make the training effective, but we give no thought on how do I make sure people start the training. And
Exactly. And that's a marketing function. Again, like we go back
exactly.
to, we're not marketers, we're trainers. So either you have to become a marketer or you have to have marketers on your team. And then starts to get really good. So I love that.
No,
Yeah.
you
And
also,
sorry.
no, I want to say you gave me an idea for a new feature that we can develop is maybe like teasers that, the
Yeah.
can send to the learner before the course starts.
Everything we build is like a
Great.
Netflix documentary or TV show, 6 or 7 series, and then it's the tease, and then how do you get them there?
No, I think it's brilliant. Thank you, Susan.
Hmm.
Valerie, I know you want
Yeah,
to
I just had a couple of little quick things to piggyback off of what Sue and Mark were saying, because I agree with Sue. I will add, though, that I think trainers are marketers because we're both focused on behavior change. So just take that little idea and kind of think about it, that really there's a lot of overlap there that we kind of miss out on sometimes. But back to Mark's point of keeping it short and Sue's point about the teaser part, one of the most effective things I saw somebody do recently. I can't claim that I came up with it, unfortunately. She works for an airline, and she was working with people behind the scenes, like the baggage handlers and the service people and whatever. And she was like, well, we need to put this on their phones because they can't sit at a computer and take a course. They can't sit down and do that. So the first thing she did was think about where they were, engage them where they are, which is they have a phone. And so she made TikTok style videos. So to Mark's point of keeping it short, but she went up one more level back to Mark's earlier point about social. She went and included some of them in the videos. So now they got to see each other. They got to see their colleagues. Maybe it was a baggage handler at a different airport, and so they got to see each other. So she leveled it up with both. It was short, it was super relevant, and she had that social. She was building a community of all of these people that have the same role across the world, essentially. So anyway, I just thought that was a really good example that kind of might give some people some ideas of ways to do something in their environment.
No, this is a great story. I want to open a question to everyone in the audience. Does anyone has anything you want to share as far as, something that you did that created like terrific engagement, or something that you have seen elsewhere that you've been really like, impressed, that you want to share with everyone? So anyone wants to share something? And if not, that's fine. So let's move on. And I see that Eric wrote that the greatest gamified learning app I have ever seen called Dragon Box. Actually, I'm not familiar with. It's for teaching algebra. I thought my kindergarten algebra, it was absolutely perfect. Eric, what was in that app that really created the iEngage? And if you want, you can open your mic as well and share it with everyone.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was great about it was it started out by becoming, it was just like a card flipping game, right? So they were like two areas, and you had to have one side look like the other side. And it was just started out very, very simple. It was just kind of these little character cards. And then very slowly, after each kind of stage that you go along, it started transferring the cards into numbers or into different kinds of things, and it was absolutely amazing. After I think it took my son about a month playing around with it, and he was absolutely engaged with it and had no idea that he was learning the concepts of algebra just intuitively through the app. It was amazing, and I come from a teaching background, so it was just like unbelievable. But I always kind of look at that as far as a an almost perfect implementation of engagement. It had all of the kind of Angry Birds kind of gamification stuff in there, and levels and all of that stuff. It was really, really, really good. But it absolutely worked for him. It was amazing.
I'm going to download this app. I really want to see it.
It was really, really amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
How old is your? You said it's your son or daughter?
Yeah, so this was it. The app is a little old, so he's a sophomore in high school now.
Okay.
Uh but and let's see, so this would have been maybe 2015 or so,
Wow,
I think.
long time. I
This
wonder
came
how the
out.
apps looks like now, if they're still around. But that's
Yeah, but it was really, I just really, really thought it was good. But I've been really enjoying what everybody's been saying about it. But definitely like that, as far as like using like implement, I just really think that, and I wrote it down what you said about the wall, about the paying rent.
yeah.
Whatever elements you use in any kind of thing you craft ought to have a purpose related to the thing you're trying to teach.
Yeah,
I,
true.
and so
Very true.
this was a little weird and unrelated, but it was good. I think it was really fantastic, especially because I think a big problem with education kind of games, especially for kids, is they can see that crap like just like right out of the box, like, oh, you're trying to teach me something, and I think that as adults we kind of get the same thing, right? Like I can add a bunch of gamification elements to my bloodborne pathogens compliance training, but man, that's just, I mean, I can think of a lot better ways to like teach stuff like that than, like, here, let me add a point system to or leaderboards to how well you can clean up blood.
No, absolutely. Eric, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. I have two more questions and then we'll have a Q&A session with everyone so you can start thinking on some other questions that you might have. One aspect that we put, as I mentioned before, lots of focus within our LMS is the ability to provide feedback to learners. So we either do it through a coach, through AI, through buddies, communities. I would love to hear from your experience, like how did you see difference between training that people got feedback throughout the training versus training that people, it was just, absorbing content and doing tests at the end? Like, can you share with us a little bit on, how it affects engagement and how it also affects results? Yeah, Valerie, I want to start. I see that you're nodding.
I see Bradley has his hand up, so I want to acknowledge that too.
Yeah, I didn't say it.
Yeah, I just want to, and I want to sort of bridge both of the points that what I find works best is when I've been in a teaching situation, in a training situation, is when I have rapport with the audience, with the learners, and in anything digital, that's a huge challenge. Is because learning is social, and people are social, and rapport is a measure of how am I connected with that person. Am I on the same wavelength with that person? So I, that whole challenge, and it's and my other point is engagement is for what? In my mind, in the learning process, it's to create attention. Because in the learning process, if I don't have attention in the brains that are learning my stuff, then I'm not going to get encoding that goes into long-term memory, that attaches to other history, that is useful when I need it. And so marketing is terrific, but we never have to lose track of what we're doing in learning is different than marketing. That it's long term. That it's not just a behavior change, which is really what marketing is. It's a knowledge change. It's an ability to bring back a piece of information and experience, a skill, and use it at another time. And I think this is a wonderful topic because it drives us to those other questions of how do we use engagement to create long-term, accessible, meaningful learning that creates behavior change. That because that's what we want. We don't want short term. We want long term. We want it in that long term consolidated memory, and engagement is part of what causes that. It's because it focuses the attention and creates really good encoding.
No, I agree. Thank you, Bradley, for sharing this. And Valerie, do you
Sure.
remember the question? Or
I do. We're going to talk about feedback, and it ties in nicely with what Bradley said, actually. I would say to Bradley's point, I stole the mantra from a colleague of mine: connection before content. He's absolutely correct. If there's no connection, if you do not connect with the learners, if you don't connect the learners with why they're there and the relevancy and all those things, all those connection points have to happen before any learning is going to happen. So yes, I'll throw that out there, which ties in with the feedback question, which was your question. And it's 1,000. I mean, it's 1,000% better. I don't know. Is that big enough? 2,000% better? I don't know. It's like it's immeasurable, the difference between sitting somebody in front of an e-learning module and just clicking through and having some feedback. And to an earlier point, I think it was when Dragonbox came up. One of the advantages of there's a book called The Game Believes in You. It was by Greg Topo, who writes for USA Today. But one of the quotes in that book that stuck with me was, games are infinitely patient and infinitely stupid. And what they meant was, and that's why with AI now, to the point earlier, yes, if you have 1,000 people, you now with AI can provide some feedback and you can provide something. Because like a game, it sits there and it will sit there and it will answer questions with you forever. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't need to go, get water. It doesn't need to do anything. And that is one of these powers, but that's a feedback loop. That's exactly what this is. And a feedback loop is very much like an engagement loop. Yes, the engagement keeps you going, and so does the feedback. You get the information, you process, you do something with it, and take a new action and keep moving from there. So without the feedback, you're just kind of sitting at a stationary point. You've kind of put the brakes on, you have a nice like sort of wheel moving along, and then you've just sort of jammed the brakes on if you don't have some mechanism for that. But I will caution people that when we talk about feedback, I think so often we again, it's one of those words we use without it meaning what everybody thinks it means, because from the one side, feedback is also a reward system. I take an action, I get information back, I get feedback back. That's a reward mechanism. And so when people talk about, oh, I don't like gamification because it's all extrinsic rewards and prizes, no, it's not. Quite often the feedback is access to new information. It's access to talking to that, that buddy or that whatever. That's the feedback mechanism. And then the other piece of it is, too often we talk about looking at the learner analytics, we talk about the data, but we don't actually use it to its full capacity. So going back, like the blood, I was like designing a course in my head when when Eric was talking about the blood pathogens, because I'm like thinking, yes, it's an escape room, but the point is not that it's fun. The point is that you're observing their behavior. That's the beauty of an escape room. It's not about them having fun. Yes, they can have fun, but that's not the value of it. The value is he'd be able to track which elements did they have the most trouble with, which questions did they struggle with, what information do I need to reinforce, who worked together better. I have all these data points that I can use, but we sometimes don't go back and leverage those to the best ability. So it was a really long answer, considering I remember the question.
No, it's a great action, and I love the fact that you see feedback as, in a way, a gamification element, which is,
Mm-hmm.
if you're looking at gamification, eventually it's not about leaderboards and stars. It's about using game mechanics,
Yep.
mechanics that really like engage us in games and bring those mechanics to real lives.
Yep.
And I think one of the most profound elements that you see in games is that for every action that you do, you get feedback back from the game. And this is something which is many times is missing in adult learning. So absolutely. Susan, Mark, do you want to add anything to it, to the question about the feedback?
Yeah, yeah. I think just to really agree that feedback is so essential. So when I'm doing training, even though it's feedback in a different context, if I'm training managers and leaders, then one of the things I always train them on is how to give good feedback and the importance of feedback. We all like feedback. We all need feedback. We all want praise. We want to know how we're doing. So even if it's not coming from a person, it's coming from a course that we're doing, perhaps it's absolutely essential, and it's really easy to overlook that, I think, particularly when you're designing online learning. But we all really like feedback. We all really like some kind of positive reinforcement about what we're doing. So it is just absolutely essential. It does help to create that connection, that rapport, that we were talking about just now. And I think on that point, that's one of the things that face-to-face learning, I don't think can ever be beaten in terms of the rapport and giving that kind of feedback. And I think I see a lot of demand for in-person learning, just because you get that human element and that rapport and that completely different to an online experience. But yeah, the feedback side is really essential. It really helps you to build that confidence. It builds that engagement. Makes you want to keep going, so you keep getting more feedback and you get into that loop of what you want. And yeah, it's just really, really essential, but often overlooked in those circumstances. And I just saw a very good comment from Eric pop up in the chat about AI. And yeah, I always say please and thank you as well when I'm using AI, just in case they do take over the world. I want them to look at me nicely.
By the way, Mark, to your point, I agree with you. There is nothing that can compare to one-on-one interaction with, in real life. But one of the things that we have seen with trainers that use myQuest is that we give people the ability to, in a way, like drip feedback to people, in the sense that for every activity that a person is doing in the training, the trainer can ask the learner a question about it, like about their experience, about what happened. And then when people are sharing, we call it follow-up question. And when people are sharing their answers, it goes straight to the coach or to the accountability partner or even to the AI assistant. And then a few minutes later or a few hours later, they get feedback for the action that they took. So it really gives, even though it's online and it's mainly text-based, it really gives people the sense and that someone else is seeing them for every action that they take. And it's something that it's really difficult to do in one real life one-on-one session, because you just meet with someone for an hour and then they need to take a process for like 2 weeks and you're not there with them. And I think the combination of blended learning, when you can also have this kind of meaningful meeting with someone and really create good rapport with them, and then dripping these small chunks of feedback along the way, creates an incredible learning experience. And this is something that we have seen along the way. Susan, any last words about feedback that you want to add?
I feel like there's a couple directions I could go, but I think the one that's really coming to me is so the best, however you feel about them, the first at and the best at online engagement is Facebook. Truly, they built the community model. I think they're incredible, and there's so much you can learn from how they set up their systems and what they do. But one of the most interesting features as far as this feedback is, I agree with everyone that we want feedback, but we're also quite afraid of it, because we really don't want to know that maybe we're not doing something right, or it's really very vulnerable to hear there is an expansion that you can do for yourself. And so people will generally withhold or kind of shrink in and not share in a way that they normally could in an online setting where there's a little bit more anonymity to it. So think about that term of like, and I found this in sales. This is like a crazy thing in sales. I actually close better deal. My close rate is better without a camera because there's so much involved in like the visibility of seeing each other. And so providing spaces for people to be anonymous in asking questions, receiving feedback. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call right now that were maybe thinking about things, but for whatever reason didn't. You know, like, are there ways to like send things through a separate chat and let other people like, so just think about anonymity and protecting people and giving them spaces to receive feedback and ask for feedback without all of the you know, the barriers that go into that. So that's the one I'll add. And I think Facebook is exceptional at it.
Oh, thank you, Susan. One last question, and guys, you can start writing. We have like 3 more minutes, so if you have 1 or 2 questions, maybe we can address those. Susan, Mark, and Valerie, if you want, you can put your LinkedIn or any link that you want here in the chat, so people can connect with you if they would like to. Billy will also put here on the chat a link to book a call with us if you want to learn more about the myQuest LMS and the training platform. So you can use this link as well, and she'll also put here a link to our website. And one last question in the last 3 minutes that we have, I want to talk a little bit about measurement of engagement. How do you measure engagement? Like, this is a tough question, right? Like, I'm sure there are many different ways to measure engagement based on what you're doing, but anyone wants to take this last challenge and, you know, to address this question? Susan, Valerie, Mark?
I'll give you a quick down and dirty, easy
Yeah.
way, because sometimes you just need a basic metric to get started with. And again, it's going to go back to Facebook and how we measure like social engagement. So it's a pretty predictable curve that about less than 10% of people will actually respond in a given environment. So if you're putting things out there, check open rates, check if there's a way for people to simply do thumbs up, thumbs down, comments. You can literally take the percentage, make it a percentage. So if 25 people were on this call and we go back and you check your chat and we had, you know, how many people actually put a comment in the chat, how many people actually came off of mute and talked, how many people did a heart or a smiley face or something like that, you can actually get an engagement metric. And what I like about having that is it gives you a baseline. Now we have something to play with, right? This is what gamification is all about in my mind. How good can we get? What are the national averages? What is our average? What would we have to do if we wanted to get this up by 2 more percentage points? And you can kind of take that playfulness and that curiosity and that internal, like, how good can we get, right? The girls gymnastics team, right, who did phenomenally amazing. Now, listen, they were expected to be, but you know, their little tagline was, you know, this concept of let's F around and find out, like, how good can we really get? And if you don't know what your baseline is, meaning you need an actual number, then you can't measure progress over time. So play around with that. You actually get to make up the rules. You set the baseline and you tell people what the good, better, and best progress is. So use that. You can go onto any social media platform and get national averages, division averages, or you can simply make up your own scale. And that's all you need to do is take the one number and divide it by the other number, and then you have a percentage. That's powerful, and it's an incredible story to share throughout the organization too.
Oh, thank you, Susan. This is incredible. I know that we are running out of time. One last thing that I know that many times in this meeting, many people wants to connect with each other. It's a great opportunity, you know, to expand our network and meet new people. So feel free, like in the next few minutes, you can put your LinkedIn here on the chat if you want people to connect with you. You can write a few words about yourself as well. I know that there are lots of, you know, trainers and entrepreneurs here in the audience, and I'm sure we can help and support each other. So feel free to do this. While people are doing it, let's take one last question from the audience, and then we need to finish because I know we're running out of time. Anyone has any question that you want to share? I see that Miranda shared their LinkedIn and Diane. So anyone else has any question that you want to share before we finish? Okay. So I really want to thank Susan, Mark, and Valerie for this incredible discussion. I actually learned quite a few new things today, and this is great. I'm always happy to learn new things. I'm sure all of you have learned. We're doing these meetups and webinars usually every 2 to 3 weeks, every time with a different topic. Our goal is really to help the community, really help instructional designers and trainers to take their training to the next level, because eventually our goal is really to help people to grow. This is what we're up to as a company. So thank you all for tuning into this meeting, and we would love to see you on our next meetings. And again, thanks a lot for all of our panelists. It's been great. And we're looking forward to connect with all of you.